Well, I'm very excited because I'm here sitting next to one of my favourite novelists, Amanda Craig. Hello.
Hello, Mark.
It's great to have you here, and thank you so much for helping us launch this new venture for us, our social justice focus this year on modern slavery.
Oh, thank you for inviting me. I'm delighted.
And of course I've invited you, of course, selfishly so that I can meet you and talk to you. But, of course, what I want to talk especially with you about is a novel that I read a few years ago now, which we'll come to a little bit later, which focuses also on this area and in various ways, and we'll come to that. But I wondered if you could just, you're a very well-known and admired novelist, but can I ask you to say a little about yourself as we launch into this conversation? What would you like people to hear about you at this stage?
Very little. Because to me, really, it's about the work, not about me. But I am the author of 9 novels. I'm deep in the middle of writing a 10th, which it just so happens also touches on aspects of modern slavery and trafficking. I live in London, in North London, and before I became a published novelist, I was a journalist, really only full-time for about 10 years. Mm-hmm. But I am a believer in people writing fiction much as Dickens wrote fiction, which is going out into the world and listening to people and even interviewing people and finding out things that are under our noses that people aren't seeing. So sometimes there's a stronger element of that in my work, and sometimes it's more in the background. But I do feel very passionately about social justice and the growing inequalities that we have in our society today, not just in Britain, but the developed world in general. And I suppose that does, I hope, put me in a certain fictional tradition.
This is writing as a moral duty, as well as
yes, but I don't want to lecture people.
No, but
yes.
it's taking the present and scrutiny of the present.
Yes.
Seriously, rather than just as an entertainment.
Yes, I think you also do need to entertain people and to move them and to give them hope and all those things. I think it's no good writing fiction where people feel as if they're, sorry Mark, attending a rather bad sermon. Yeah, a good sermon is another
that
matter.
Never happens
but it
at
never
Southwark,
happens.
Of course,
no, of course not.
No.
But yes, you need to carry people along in a work of fiction, but also you hope, perhaps encourage them to think about things that they hadn't thought about before.
And do you think, there's a big interest at the moment, isn't there, in historical fiction? Do you think that that's overtaken an interest in the present?
Yes, I'm very, very hot on this, because although I completely understand why people want to escape the present into the past, and why people feel the past is more aesthetically pleasing and they feel perhaps nurtured by subsuming themselves in Tudor history or whatever. I am deeply worried by what has happened in my lifetime, where people really have lost interest in contemporary fiction and feel that it's ugly, nasty, has nothing to do with them, is going to confront them with things that they don't want to think about. So I am constantly trying to kind of ride 2 horses, as it were, in that I am absolutely writing about things, and particularly, some things that are absolutely appalling, like slavery. But I also want to give people hope. I want to give them love stories. I want to give them the elements of a detective novel, all these things that have always made people love fiction. So it's weaving all these things together. And yes, it's not particularly loved, that as a, I don't know if it's a genre, but I know the other handful of contemporary novelists quite well, people like Andrew O'Hagan and John Lanchester, and I think it's quite interesting that none of us has won a prize for that kind of book. You just have to kind of accept that it's not fashionable.
Yeah.
And yet, when people discover it, they tend to love it.
Indeed.
So,
it's because you're being helped to see what you probably aren't seeing.
well, even things like, there is a branch of it which has recently become tremendously fashionable, which is through the detective novel or spy novel, which is someone like Mick Herron.
Oh, yes.
And he's doing that whole Dickensian thing quite brilliantly, but with a much more propulsive plot and goodies and baddies and moral compromise. And I love that too, but that's not exactly what I'm writing.
And when you're reviewed, people often compare you to Dickens because of this sort of condition of England genre sort of thing. But I detect Trollope in your... Trollope an influence?
I adore Trollope, yes. He's so fun and naughty, and Trollope is tremendously shocking to the modern reader because he does something that we've almost stopped doing, except I do it, which is to talk about what things cost. And I think that's enormously important information, even if, of course, inflation is moving much faster than it did in Victoria's or Jane Austen's day. But I think it's really important that people know what a funeral costs, how much you need to be an eligible spouse, what you need to have a middle-class lifestyle. All of these things are really, I think, almost like kind of dirty secrets for a lot of people. And we need to know this stuff. You need to know about it in order to arm yourself for life, perhaps to protest about the injustice of it. But, it should absolutely not be swept under a Tudor embroidered cloak as if it doesn't exist.
And so let's get on to Hearts and Minds. This is was it your sixth novel?
Yes,
I think
that's right,
sixth
yes.
novel. And it takes up the theme of modern slavery. We can come to that in a second. And you've said that your most recent that you're working on also does too. Why is this an important subject to you?
I think because basically it's one of the worst things that can happen to a fellow human being. To be deprived of liberty, to be deprived of agency, and then probably on top of that to be raped, to be tortured, to be exploited. These are terrible things. And the fact that this is still going on in a society like our own, which is supposed to be so much more, advanced and compassionate and humane and bound by law, is horrific. And once you discover this kind of thing is going on, it's like a kind of burning feeling in your heart. You just can't ignore it.
That's what I've found about once we made the decision to pursue this. And the more you learn about it, the more you meet people who are survivors or are working with survivors. It's the sense of it being a burning injustice against human dignity.
Yes,
Really
dignity is a big part of it.
So, Hearts and Minds took a little while to write, I believe.
Yes, it took, I think it's 6 years, or was it even 7? Largely because in my early 40s, when I had 2 young children, I discovered I had cancer. And hot on the heels of that discovery, which took an awfully long time to find out why I was so exhausted, because I kept being told by my then GP that I was a mother of young children, I should expect to be exhausted, all this nonsense. And I knew I was ill. And So it took a long time to get a diagnosis, and no sooner did I get that diagnosis than I also discovered I had appendicitis. So, and also a really nasty female complaint called endometriosis, which people know much more about now. So I was just totally, prostrated for 3 years, lots and lots of surgery. And when you are very ill with young children and you don't have family to help you, you have to buy help. And the help that I managed to find at that time, this being the sort of the early part of the noughties, as they're now called, was largely these lovely immigrant people who I paid, of course, to drive me to do all the things I was doing, cleaning and childcare and so on. And mostly from Eastern Europe.
Yeah.
And inevitably, when you're kind of lying bored to sobs on the sofa, feeling sorry for yourself, you talk to them. And so I discovered so much about this hidden world. And that was really why I wanted to write about it, because even none of the people I was paying was trafficked. A couple of them were illegal. And I think there's a big kind of underworld where they do know a lot of other people and they do know of other stuff that's going on. So I did have a childminder who was very pretty, who was Ukrainian. And she said, I've been told so many times that if I became a prostitute, I would earn 10 times what you're paying me. And I said, well, so what's stopping you? And that led to really interesting conversations and stories. And I did have a minicab driver, a bit like Job, who told me a lot about his life as a Zimbabwean refugee. But a huge amount I also researched and imagined. And I'd always kind of been aware of this world. My dad worked for many years for the UN in Italy, for the FAO, and I'd kind of grown up as quite a sensitive child with his work. He did the press office there with these terrible photographs of starving children. And I'd done that thing as a child of saying, but Daddy, how can these kids like me be starving, because they've got great big stomachs on them? So learning why children's bellies swell out because they've got nothing in them was a shock. Just there were these kind of shocks all the way through to one's innocence. But as I said, when you actually talk to people and they're real human beings with hopes and fears and ambitions and plans and intelligence and talent that you just can't blossom because of the legal situation they're in, you do think this is simply appalling and I have to write about this. And you can write lots and lots of journalism that would expose it, but nobody gives a damn about that sort of story. The only way that you get people to start really thinking about it is if you make them feel, and the way that you make them feel, I think, is through story.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, an imaginative engagement with this rather than a statistical one.
Yes, and even if it's, we all saw the Mr. Bates in the Post Office story, which was another, which was a documentary, but a kind of drama documentary, the way they'd done it. And that's when people start to care, I think.
Yeah. So what I love about your series of novels is that there's normally a minor character in one who then becomes a major character in the next novel.
Yes.
And we have Polly, who reappears in this and becomes a central character who's a sort of human rights immigration lawyer.
Yes.
But we've also got a Russian au pair, we've got a trafficked sex worker from Ukraine, we've got a Zimbabwean taxi driver who also works at the car wash.
Yes.
We've got an American reporter who...
magazine editor, that's
right. A South African teacher who's rather shocked at the sort of soullessness of the school pupils and the staff.
Well, it's tough. It's a tough environment.
Yes.
You know, it's yes. All these people I researched, and there were people I interviewed formally and also just chatted to informally. And with the exception of the traffickers, you do get very, very fond of all your characters. I do love doing something that. Again, critics sometimes have a bit of difficulty with, which is writing about people who are flawed. I do think we are all flawed. We're all a mixture of good and evil and everything in between. And I'm not interested in writing about people who are perfectly good. I could do that. I have met one or two people I thought were exceptionally good and virtuous people. But I don't know, maybe they would be interesting because it's such a rare thing. But on the whole, it's people's flaws that perhaps make them more human.
And it's Anna who is the trafficked sex worker from Ukraine who comes over thinking she's going to be a maid.
Yes,
working
a waitress, Waitress. And they were really doing that at the time I was writing. I mean, there were these procuresses, as they were, who were coming back to their country to entice these girls over. And it was very interesting because this Ukrainian who I employed, who was illegal, I didn't know she was illegal when I employed her, she came over on a student visa. She said towards the end of her time with us that there were now advertisements going on TV warning girls about this. But at the time she came over, she was very lucky, I think. There wasn't any information. And they were all, it was when Ukraine was sort of opening up, and the new Bond girl was this extraordinarily beautiful actress called, I think she's called Olga Kurilenko. Still see her occasionally. And they all thought they were going to be the next Bond girl. It was fantastical. But that's how they get trapped.
And trapped in fear because they get possessed by somebody or a group of people.
Yes.
And their passports taken away.
It's so easy to disempower people.
Yeah.
I think people forget that.
And the power of fear over somebody.
Yeah.
So if you make one false move, if you try to escape, your life's in danger, or anybody you love's life is in danger.
Yes.
They fear that somebody's going to report them for being here and they're going to be locked away, and so on it goes. The fears, it seems to me, are paralysing.
Totally. Well, I say at one point they're like those chickens when a chalk line is drawn on the floor and they just peck, 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 and they can't lift their heads. It's a extraordinary thing if you've ever seen that. Yes, it just saturates everything, that kind of fear. And I very much wanted to write a story about one of these trafficked women escaping, what it would take. One of the inspirations for this particular novel was that there was, in fact, at the time I was developing this story in Hearts and Minds, there was a brothel round the corner from us in Agar Grove in North London. And it was like the one I described. So there were ordinary, respectable tenants, living on the top 2 floors, just renting a flat. And they noticed that lots and lots of men were coming and going at all times of night, and they gradually worked out what was going on. But it took ages for the police to come. By ages, literally years. And then, as in the novel, right at the end, there was this big swoop. But you just think of the suffering that could have been, perhaps nipped in the bud, although of course you don't know what then happens to these women. I think they do get returned.
And the conditions in which they're living, the food or lack of it, the way that they're carted around.
Yeah.
And certainly in your novel, you don't hold back about showing the brutality of what's going on.
Yes. No. I mean, this girl who's I can't remember. I think she's 15, isn't she? She's gang raped as soon as she arrives. And that breaks her. And I thought, and that was extremely horrible to describe. But I thought, I have to describe this. I can't pretend it's not happening, because it's so awful. And how do you recover enough from that to actually think that you could have agency? And it takes this extraordinary man, this Zimbabwean man, Job, who goes to the brothel to have sex with a prostitute because he's lost his wife. She didn't come with him to Britain, and he thinks he doesn't know what's happened to her, but he's been on his own for, I think it's 7 years, and he's just, he's quite a young man. He's just going mad. And then when he meets this girl, Anna, he just can't bring himself. He is a Christian, and he can't bear it. And he devises this very kind of simple plot to get her out. And really, it's not just that he gives her some money and he distracts the men. It's that he sees her as a human being, and that, I think, gives her back some agency. And then she's also helped by another woman.
How do you think London comes out of this novel? I mean, disinterested, callous?
No, I think, London is like, human nature itself. It's such a vast, complex mixture of people with different ideas about themselves and other people, different faiths, different interests and passions. I wouldn't say that London is amoral there, ever. No. I think it just has lots of conflicting pushes and pulls. I love London. I believe in it,
So do I.
Good. And I think that it has this extraordinary energy to it that I'm kind of convinced comes from the river, although this probably sounds a bit woo-woo, but it's been settled by people for thousands of years because of that river. And you've only got to come down to the banks of the Thames to feel that so
well, we blessed it
forcefully.
Last Sunday. We have the big blessing of the Thames because of exactly that.
Because of that.
It is the channel of life for this city, not only in terms of trade and water, but also inspirationally, artistically.
Yes. No, I certainly feel that tremendously strongly in the fact that it's a tidal river. You just feel that there's something there that's remarkable.
Yeah. So we talked about agency, or you mentioned the word agency. I mean, I know already at the beginning of this year from conversations I've had that the one thing people often ask when they hear about all these things happening, usually not very far away from you in London, these things are happening in your street, around your corner. People say, well, what can I do? What can the ordinary person do? I don't think there's one big answer to that, but there are responses to it, perhaps.
Definitely.
And I just wondered what you...
Well, when I wrote Hearts and Minds, I actually tried Googling, and this was in, as I said, the sort of 2006, 2007. And what I discovered is that unless you know, or this was the case then, I hope it's changed now, I'm pretty sure it has, unless you knew the word trafficked, it was really hard to find a website with help on it. Even things like human slavery, you were not led down these paths that might get you somewhere. I'm pretty sure that has changed and is changing. But it's why projects like yours at Southwark Cathedral are really important, because, the more you have, it's not just about publicity, it's about finding paths through the jungle, or however you want it, the maze, because I think that for people who have been ensnared in this horror, that's the thing. It's giving them agency, giving them the information. And of course, the other big thing is that people now have smartphones.
Yeah.
So everybody's now connected to
Yeah.
a computer or a search engine. And that, I think, helps too.
Yeah.
But in individual life, yes, I think, unfortunately, it's a bit like what they say about rats. You're never more than 5 feet away from one. And I think that's probably true of people who are trafficked, because there is so much incentive to, exploit, possess, depress, other people who don't have agency, who don't have money, who don't have education, and who are, I'm afraid, very often here illegally.
Yeah. And certainly one thing one can do is educate yourself to read the signs better.
Yes.
And it's something that we're doing. We've had a training session with our staff, and we're going to be doing one with the congregation soon, and other people who work in the cathedral, like our day chaplains, to be able to read some of the signs that are often there when somebody is in this situation. That seems to me to be one thing we can do. Also, maybe to trust that sort of sixth sense instinct we have if something's up.
Yes, if something's wrong.
And we will be making sure that people know how to report that if it.
Oh, that's brilliant.
Because often we don't. We are left and think, oh, but should I have done that? Should I have reported it? Should I? And I think we need to encourage people to pursue it sometimes.
Yes, yes.
That can make the big difference sometimes. I mean, one of the things I love about your novels and our work as a cathedral is that, you are not left after reading a novel by you believing that human beings are atoms. We are interconnected.
Yes.
We have a lot more responsibilities towards each other than we like to admit.
Yeah.
And I think this really comes out in Hearts and Minds.
Thank you. Well, yes. I mean, I've often said that, I don't want anyone to finish a novel by me feeling like they must slit their wrists because life is so terrible, that they feel worse than they did when they began it. I always want to offer people hope and make them feel there is hope and there is energy and there is love and kindness, but there's also terrible things about us that it's and I do believe that if fiction as a form is to survive, and it's deeply embattled, I think as embattled as the church, if not more so, it has to offer that. It has to offer hope and faith that that we can help one another and we are not lost.
If you had one thing for our listeners to take away from this today about the subject or about the program that we're developing, what would you want people just to take away as a thought?
I think it's a difficult question as always. I think that we all have more power in ourselves than we realise. But we have to kind of trust ourselves to find that and to express it and to use it for other people. That's the other thing. I think there's a great deal at present about finding yourself, healing yourself, empowering yourself, and what, all very well, but actually what people are not saying is that the best possible way you can do that is to help other people, to turn outwards. And there's not inwards, because it's in turning outwards that you really find joy.
And the old Christian monastic communities often used to say, you find your salvation in your neighbour.
Yeah, very much.
It's not in your navel.
Yes.
It's in your neighbour.
It's in your neighbour. That's a good,
So,
a good phrase. Yes.
well, it's been a real delight to meet you,
And you too,
talk
Mark.
with you, and
Greatly admire your work too.
well, thank you, and we will stay in touch, and we're very excited about this coming year and all that we've got planned, and for your help in launching it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.